So in this video, we're going to talk about how to describe sets of numbers using inequality and interval notation. So here we're going to start talking about some new notation, and this is going to come back when we talk about domain and range in a later unit. Remember in Algebra 1, when you studied domain and range, you talked about the functions as inequalities. So in Algebra 2, we're going to use 3 different types of notation, and one of them is called interval notation, and that's what we're going to get a quick preview of in today's lesson. So let's review inequality notation. So remember, inequality notation, we use the less than or equal to or greater than or equal to sign whenever we have a filled in circle, and a less than or greater than sign whenever we have an open circle, because it's depending on whether the endpoint is included or not. So in this first example, our endpoint is included, so we're going to write this as -3 less than or equal to for the filled in circle, and then x, and then our right endpoint is 4, so less than or equal to 4. In the second example, our endpoints are -6 and +5. We put the x in the middle, and then the -6 needs a less than sign because of the open circle. 5 needs a less than sign because of the open circle. Here, in this last example, it goes from -5 to +5, right? Let's put the x in the middle. -5, we have a filled-in circle, so less than or equal to sign. +5 is an open circle, so we use the less than sign. So now let's take these 3 examples and write them in interval notation. So in interval notation, if we have a filled-in circle with the endpoint included, we're going to use a square bracket. And if we have an open circle where the endpoint's not included, we're going to use an open parentheses. Just like with mixed inequalities, we can have mixed intervals also. So we can combine an open parentheses and a square bracket. So in this first one, we have our interval from -3 to 4, and both endpoints are included, so we're going to put square brackets around the whole thing. In the second example, our interval goes from -6 to 5, but both endpoints are not included, so we're going to use open parentheses. Last example goes from -5 to 5, but the -5 is included, so square bracket there. +5 is not included, so open parentheses there. So what about infinity? So whenever we talk about infinity, you want to use an open parentheses because infinity is not like a specific number. It's more of like an abstract concept. It's like an idea that, okay, our graph is headed off in this direction. So if we look at this first example, we could say, okay, well, here it's headed to -infinity. So it goes from -infinity, so open parentheses with -infinity, and then to 4. 4 is included, so we do a square bracket at 4. So 3 here is an open parentheses because the 3 is not included, but then it goes off to +infinity, so we're going to use the open parentheses with +infinity. Okay, so infinity is not an exact number, so we're going to use open parentheses whenever we're talking about it. Okay, so what if we have something like this? Notice this kind of looks like a graph in 2 pieces, right? So we need to be able to say something like, well, I have this section A, and I have this section B. Okay, so this little U symbol right here, that's kind of how we represent and in mathematics. It's actually called the union symbol. So let's see what this looks like. So if this was an interval notation, like this piece goes from -infinity to -2, the -2 is included, so we would put the square bracket with 2. Then we write our and with the union symbol, and then you can see this piece right here, it starts off at 5 with an open parentheses, and it heads off into +infinity. So we would say open parentheses at 5, and then +infinity with the open parentheses. So the union symbol is needed to combine those 2 pieces of the graph. Okay, so now let's describe the following set of values using inequality and interval notation. So this goes from -infinity here on the left, and it goes to 9. So as an inequality, we'd say -infinity less than x less than or equal to 9, right, because of the closed circle. In interval notation, that would look like open parentheses at -infinity, and it goes all the way to 9 with the square bracket. If you want to write this in inequality notation, remember you can also write x less than or equal to 9, and you don't have to include that infinity part. But I just did it so you could see how we get from inequality to interval notation. Okay, what about this one? So here we're at -1, and we go to +infinity. So in inequality notation, that's going to be -1 less than x, right, because the open circle, and then less than infinity. In interval notation, that's going to go from -1 to +infinity with the open parentheses. Okay, now let's try this one. So here we have 2 specific endpoints, so we're going to go from -5 less than x, and then less than or equal to +10. In interval notation, that's going to look like open parentheses at -5, and then square bracket at +10. Okay, so now you can go ahead and pause the video and try doing this example on your own. So here we have something that starts off at -1, so we do -1 less than or equal to x, and then less than 8, In an interval notation, that's going to look like -1 square bracket and going all the way to 8 with an open parentheses. So when describing a set of values, we can use inequality or interval notation. And when using these different types of notation, it's important to consider whether we need to include the endpoints.